Good morning. This is Phil Guinois with Micah Watkins. Jack DeShane is out today, and we have a special guest on our podcast, Michael Kreitimger. We're going to bring him on in a little bit. This is the ENO Business Success Podcast, May 13th, 2024. And so, Micah, you had some good thoughts of what we might want to talk about today in our conversation, because that's really all this is a conversational podcast.
Absolutely. So, I was introduced to a book. Last week I was having coffee with a friend, and he said, hey, check out this book. And I needed something new to listen to. I needed a little extra juice. And it was called The Ultimate Gift by Jim Stovall. And I was great. Popped it on, gave it a listen, and there was something there. There's some really good, it's a real short, quick little listen. Maybe at like 2.5 hours, windshield time, you could, power through it. So one of the things that struck me, and it kind of hit me, it was like, write out how you want your last day of life to look like. What do you want that to look like? And I was like, oh man, that's a really good question. A lot of people say, oh yeah, I've given thought to like how I want my funeral or my celebration of life or whatever like that to look like at the end of the day. Wow, that's really powerful. How many people stop to think about that?
I don't think a lot of people think about it because it's an area that they don't want to address.
Absolutely. They're missing something. There's a gift there. So when I started thinking about, what do I want my funeral service to look like? I have a vision. I have a vision, and I have certain, aspects of my vision that this is what's happening. And it is a celebration. It's truly it's a massive party. The one thing that, and I've experienced this because both my parents have passed, both of their services was jam-packed. And I'll never forget my father's. He was 56 years old, so he's still in still in his prime of his life, right? The people that showed up, wow, that was really it was amazing to see how many people showed up. I took that as a representation of how many people and people's lives he touched. That he meant enough for all those people to show up for that event. There's a lot of people that go through life that isn't so much the case, right? So then I got to thinking, I was like, okay, I've got this vision for myself, right? But I hadn't really given too much thought of figure out what you want your last day to look like. And that hit me. I was like, okay, well, what are we doing here? We're all business owners, right? We all got a business here. We're running around. We're, driving home our business. And how are they correlated? I think they are. Because really, ultimately, at the end of the day, we're like, what are we doing here? We all got these businesses, and what's the end goal? What do we want that to look like?
Well, I think, a couple things. So I'm actually going to back up before I answer that question. And here's what's interesting, the contrast. So, my dad, I think this fall will be 8 years that he's been gone, and he was 87 or 88 when he passed. And he was a full colonel in the Air Force, full professor of psychology at ASU, very well known. And there was no one at the services other than myself, my brother, my sister, my daughter, my youngest daughter, because she was in town, and then ex-brother-in-law. And I think that was about it. And there's a couple reasons. Number one, a lot of the people that were in Dad's life were gone. At that age, that happens, right? But the other was he was very specific. He didn't want a big deal, right? And I think that there was a missing there. We honored what he wanted and whatnot, but it was quite different knowing the impact that he'd made. There was a lot of students from ASU. There were a lot of people that knew him. And so it was just quite different to have that kind of person in your life. And then it's virtually just a handful of family members at the services. So, but at the end of the day, kind of going back to that question, Mike, I think that, beyond the basics of, what are we doing and how does our business and our last day on, look like, we're here to, obviously put some food on the table, pay the bills and all that. But I think at the end of the day, at one level or another, we all do what we do for the most part because there is a passion behind it. There is some juice, so to speak, that we get out of it. And I think that over time that juice, that passion can ebb and flow, right? There are times that, in the 20 years that I've been doing what I'm doing in health and wellness, that there are times that, I'm just at the top of the world on it, right? And then there's other times that it's not so much and it feels like, it's okay, but it's not quite there. So I think that, what you're alluding to is what's the impact that we want to make in the world and how would that show up in our business and our life if we started looking at what would my last day look like?
Absolutely. Like that right there. So when I started networking, it was in the life insurance space, right? Now, our guest today, he's a financial advisor. I knew when I got into, just doing life insurance that I had no desire to ever become a financial advisor and hold the licenses that they do, right? I knew that was not one part. Now, there are a lot of people in that industry, they're like, oh my goodness, you're so dynamic. I want you on my team. I want you to be part of my firm, all this stuff. I've had those conversations. People wanted me in the office to do the financial advising piece because they're just like, oh man, you would be perfect for it. I had no desire to do that. It was part of the vision. I looked at every business that anything. Let's say I was still in restaurants, right? Even when I look back and say, oh, if I was still in restaurants today, when that last day, I would still want to look back with gratitude and how many people did I impact in that industry? How many people were better off because I was able to give a part of myself into them and impart whatever I could from them, and they take it and do whatever they want with it, right? But that was the vision for me. So then just sitting there going, oh man, like what do I want that last day to look like? The business, right? The business aspect is, well, this is how we're providing for our families and all this stuff. Like our time is incredibly it's priceless. I mean, it's very valuable, our time. And how many people are out there that are just in business, just going through the motions? And does that show up? Does that show up for their clients, for their customers? Can they feel it? I bet you that absolutely. I guarantee you they can feel it. The clients and the customers can.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back. You know why they say you're so passionate and you'd be excellent in that field? Your answer should have been, yeah, I'm so passionate because I don't have to have all of those licenses over there.
Absolutely. So.
But you mentioned, and, we both have that background in restaurants, and I look back at, the 80 restaurants that I opened and turned around, and, there's probably 2 people left active in my life anymore from those days. And I was in a little bit different space in that, I impacted a lot of people. I know that, right? Both good and bad, because that's that industry, right? But there's only 2 that I am currently in contact with, via Facebook. You met one of them, my best friend that was down here just a couple weeks ago. He and I have been friends for 40 years. Another guy actually from Portland, Oregon, where I met my best friend. And this guy is like 15 years older than I am, and I hired him as a server. I'm 21-year-old general manager, 22-year-old general manager, and he's already like in his mid-30s at that point in time. But those are the only two that like are still around because of how transient that industry is, right? And then I look at, what I've done for the last, 20 plus years in networking here in Phoenix, and now what we do with ENO, and I can tell you that I have visions of that last day, not necessarily the last day, but, well, the last day above ground. I still may be flat out, however, that, there's hundreds of people there, right? I've seen that before for me, like that there's literally hundreds of people that will show up and say, he impacted my life in this small way or this big way, whatever that is.
Absolutely. So I was talking to I was at the gym this morning. I was talking to a plumber. Yeah, I'm like, hey man, just come check out ENO. He was kind of disheartened by the whole networking thing because there's a lot of just bad networking out there, right? But what we're building here at ENO is absolutely remarkable, and it's like, for me, like when I was listening to this book and this process here, that's where I was like, oh my goodness, that's it for me. Like what we're creating here at ENO to impact business owners to actually create, just it's a tool. It's just a tool for them, the business owners, to utilize to make the impact that they're looking for in their business. That right there, though, that showed up for me. And I was like, oh man, that's the mark. That's why I get so jazzed about this. So I'm sitting there, I'm working out with this plumber guy. Awesome dude, really just stand-up awesome person. And he was like, man, I was just telling him, hey, you could check out this avenue. He had visions of wanting to have, by this point, he wanted to have 2 trucks, a crew of like 4 or 5 guys. He's got 1 van. He's got 1 guy. He's like, I got something's got to change. I need the bump. And I was like, dude, let me help you. Let me make you, I'll put you in contact with this person and that person. From there, let's see what happens, right? He's not a member. I want him to be, and that doesn't matter. It's, what can I do for you right now? I want to give and pour into you so that whatever, it just feels good. It feels right. I want to help this guy out. I want to watch him be successful. I want to watch his business grow. And then it dawned on me while I was driving here thinking about what do we talk about here? How awesome is it going to be, the feeling that I would have if all of a sudden just putting him in contact with a couple of strategic people, all of a sudden his business explodes, right?
Yep.
And then I'm going like, holy smokes, how awesome is that? That's an incredibly rewarding feeling. I've experienced that a couple of times already. I just happened to put somebody in contact with the right person at the right time that was the fit for the business. And you know what? It worked. And so I was leaving the gym and I was like, hey man, I joke around with people sometimes because I was the least networked person here in Arizona 4 or 5 years ago when I moved down here. And now I'm probably the most networked person in the city. It's just crazy. So I joked around. I was like, well, hey man, I'm like Mr. Network, like you, Phil, like Mr. Networking guy. When I moved down here, it's like, who doesn't know Phil Guinois? No, like you can walk all around this whole city and put your name out and everyone was, yeah, I know Phil. But that's the impact, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's awesome. And the feeling that is associated with that, right?
And I was trying to come up with a smart comment, but I can't.
That's all right. We'll just do this one. There we go.
And here's the deal, like with that plumber, you make an impact and most likely it's going to come back, right? It's going to come back, but it doesn't necessarily have to, and that's not the reason why you do what you do. But the likelihood is, it'll come back some way, and he may come and go, okay, I really need to check out what these guys are doing over here at ENO. And if he does, great. And if he doesn't, whichever direction it goes, doesn't matter to us, doesn't matter to you. Impact is what matters. And when you make that kind of impact, it can't help but come back and circle around and engulf you, which just feeds the flame even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just goes back into the, the feelings of giving, and what happens with that. And I mean, there's a whole list. I mean, it was a great book. There's all these different principles. Anyone listening, check it out. I mean, it's a super easy read, but there's some of the concepts are incredibly simple, yet it's done in a way that it really drives it home. There were a couple of sections where I was like, oh, geez Louise, I'm like holding back a couple of tears here. I'm getting a little wet in the eyeballs here. So, but it really simple, had a massive impact. But what do we want our lives to look like? What do we want our businesses to look like? So if all of a sudden we start to take that concept, take it, okay, I haven't thought about it personally. Okay, let's get clear on that. I'm gonna start to look and see what the visions I want for what is it that I want the end of my life to look like. Do I want to have a big celebration? Do I want all my friends and family there celebrating the impact that I had in their lives? I mean, no, for me, that would be massive. That's just the vision that I have. But then okay, great. How are we doing it with business? Because I guarantee any business person, if you take that same passion of what do you want? How much impact do you want to have on people and in their lives? If you take that with your business, and it doesn't matter what business you're doing. If you're a janitor, right? And you're just the best janitor ever, but people walk into the restrooms and they just see you, that you're working hard and you're just clean, doing whatever with a smile on your face, and you welcome them and greet them and all that. You're making an impact. Yeah. Or you could be a carpenter or whatever, right?
Yeah. There's a couple of sports movies of janitors that had massive impact on people that became, very well-known athletes. And it was the janitor that made the difference for them, right?
Absolutely.
So, Michael, let's talk about, we just finished our expo. So we do an expo every year, and we just finished an expo. So let's talk about impact and, what kind of impact did you see in that room? Because this was the first time that you were at the expo as an owner partner with us at ENO. So what was that like for you comparatively to prior years that you've been at them, but as a member of ENO and now as an owner?
Well, we did something unique and different this time, right? We didn't have guest speakers. We didn't even have a keynote speaker. And I got questions, a lot of people came up and like, oh, well, why aren't we doing speakers and all this and that? And I was like, well, at the end of the day, this expo is to highlight the members that have the booth, right? It's like we want to highlight, all of these awesome people, all the awesome vendors that we have. We want to highlight them. In years past, and when I was a vendor, right? Years past, when the speakers were going on, it almost took away from the vendors a little bit. I think, it was great to see a lot of the connections and a lot of the conversations. I talked to a couple members that they were like, oh my, got big deals on the table because of it. Just having some conversations and doing their thing. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. And I think, when you look at what, the conversations that people were having, they were having quality conversations that ultimately turned into quality business to be done. Obviously, they've got some follow-up and they got to do their thing, right? They do their thing. But I think just highlighting the vendors and letting them have the opportunity and space to highlight themselves.
Yeah.
That made that look, the feeling and the vibe and the, what it looked like was, it's completely different than years past.
Yeah. And I've said this before, and, I say this all the time at our lunches and, when we're talking with people, that I always ask a rhetorical question, if people have ever gone to an expo with, 20 or 30 vendors and, how long do they typically stay? And, kind of the common answer is somewhere around an hour to an hour and a half, and they have their conversations, they stop by their booths, they get whatever tchotchkes they get, and then they're out of there. And, Thursday last week when we did the expo, this was number 4 for us since COVID. And, it still amazes me. 4.5 hours was probably the average time that attendees stay at that expo. And there were a lot of them there. I'm thinking of, the one young attorney that showed up and, she was there all the way to the mixer at the end of the night, right? She was there literally all day. And I think that's impact, right? I think that is the byproduct. That's what you see because of the impact and the conversations that you were talking about and the highlighting and letting those members just be the showcase there. So I'm glad that we, switched the format. Now, we had a conversation. We might do something, next year that might be a little bit different because it's always about innovating and, creating the new, and keeping with what already works for us.
Absolutely. Well, then we found a fantastic space and, we weren't in there before, so we didn't really have a full,
working knowledge.
Yeah, working knowledge of the room and all that. So, yeah, it'll be even better next year.
Yep.
Look forward to it. And that's just, what do we want to create, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, I remember talking to a lot of guests that came in, not non-members. They were just guests. They popped in. And I was like, holy smokes, you're still here. Like 4.5 hours later, there were a couple of them. I had a couple of guests that, look, they just had to come in real quick. They wanted to peruse around, get a scope of the lay of the land, all that stuff. And then they had to boogie, right? Things happen. That was not the norm. That was not the norm. Most people were there somewhere. I saw a lot of people there at least 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, and I think, before we transition and bring on our guest here today, going back to the original topic, what do you want it to look like, basically, right? What do you want the last day to look like? Well, we actually have a vision for the expo. And then one of the things that we do every time is before we open the doors for the attendees to come in, we actually do a little closed door, vision rally meeting, so to speak, not a hype, not a, cheerleader rally, but literally close the doors, have the vendors and the staff come together and, we create and we allow them to create what is it that they want to bring. What's the vision for them? So I think that's part of why the event has always turned out the way that it's turned out, is that we do that. We don't just open the doors and, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah. Well, you have some intention behind it.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, yeah, I think we're, let's bring on our guest.
Bring him on.
All right. So let's welcome Michael Kreitimger. He's a financial advisor with Edward Jones, and let's bring him in. Michael, what's happening?
Awesome.
You brought your own audience, didn't you?
I did, yeah. They're in the back here on the couch. It's not a black couch, but
So,
I appreciate you guys having me today.
yeah. How was the expo for you?
It was good. It's I've done a lot of expos in the past, and you guys talk a lot about intentionality, and that does come through very heavily in the event that ENO throws. You're not wrong. I saw that attorney there the entire day. She was making her rounds on every single table and having at least a 6 or 7 minute conversation, at minimum.
Yeah.
But I'm used to larger events in that 3,000 to 6,000 space, and you do get that. I'm only here for an hour and a half, 2 hours. You get 30-second conversations with everyone, and that's about it.
Awesome. So really, what was the drive? Why become a financial advisor?
Well, for me, when my son was born in 19 and was an awesome time in our life, but I was in another career, working 80-hour weeks was the norm. Getting up at 3 a.m. and not getting home until daycare pickup at 5 and putting him to bed, and 30 minutes later falling asleep, waking up and doing the whole thing over again. For about 6 months, I never saw my son. And that was really the drive to get into the financial services. Like you said, Mike, earlier, I don't like life insurance that much. It's not a driving force in my business, but I do like managing people's money and helping them to achieve those long-term goals in tax-efficient ways. And that's where I like to have all those securities licenses and all the different debt designations and such, and keeping up with it, which is a lot of work. But that was part of the shift into the financial sector, was just not seeing my son. I still work 60 hours a week. That hasn't changed, but now I've got the ability to step away for an hour and not schedule a meeting or something and actually go be with my family. But when I was a kid, I always loved the idea of owning parts of larger companies that I used daily, right? Whether that be Walmart or Target or Boeing or anything that goes into all the technology we had as a kid, like Nintendo or Microsoft with Xbox. That was always something I wanted to do but couldn't do because the cost to enter that realm was so astronomically high in the 90s. To pay for advice was just, you had to have a lot of money. It wasn't there for the middle class, the blue collar worker. So when I jumped into the field, a big thing for me was being able to support that community in its entirety, whether I got paid for it or not. And that's what led me to getting over to Edward Jones, was because we are the blue collar kind of financial advisor, right? We're on every corner. There's 17,000 of us in the country. Most of us are in rural parts of the country, but when you're in a big metro area, we're like the Circle K here in town, right? There's one on every corner. And that's kind of how Ted Jones built his practice, was with the blue-collar worker, the everyday Joe that just didn't have that same access to capital that everyone else who had a bigger financial advisor through like Merrill Lynch or Schwab. And that was a big driver for me.
And so tell us a little bit about your background before, not only career-wise, because that was those days were more event-driven things that you had, so you didn't have a lot of control over the hours like you do now. Yep. Working the same hours, but not everything's driven around an event like it was back then. And then you've got an interesting educational background as well.
Yeah, so let's start kind of at the beginning. I joined the military when I was 17 and a half. Did my little short stint, got out, didn't know what I was doing, had an uncle, quote-unquote uncle, who got me a job at Red Bull Distribution Company as a merchandiser. Worked my way up there into management and became a district sales manager and had a team of like 13 that I managed. So again, to your point, right, it was event-driven. I had to be there at a certain time. I had to do certain things at different times of the day because I had a team that was depending on me to lead them. So I didn't have that flexibility I have now, which is what I wanted. But I was very driven on the needs of others, which was fine, and I loved it. And I wouldn't change anything that I did in my past. I'd do it all over again if you gave me the same playbook, with a smile on my face. But yeah, so during that, I also have several different degrees. I have a culinary arts degree through ACI. When I was 16, I ended up going and doing some dual credits with Mesa Community and have a associates in automotive HVAC repair. And then during my tenure as a manager at Red Bull, I got my IT degree in cybersecurity.
And how is those things, how have they impacted your financial planning piece?
Yeah, I think a big thing that it did do was it opened me up to a bunch of different worlds that I wouldn't have had access to, different styles of conversation that I now am able to have with people and meet them where they actually are, instead of being like, you can't see me now, but like, this is the most dressed up I'll ever get. I don't wear a suit top. I don't wear a tie. I got slacks and a long sleeve performance, stretchy shirt on. And that's me dressed up. Because that's my clients. They don't wear, $1,000 suits, things like that. So that all those different degrees definitely gave me a different insight into the individual that I wanted to help. Was because they also have a couple of different degrees, or they have one degree that they don't use, but at the time they went to school for it because they wanted to, and then something happened down the road and they made a pivot. And they would probably say the same thing too that I'm saying today, is like, that pivot, I would do it 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Well, you think about it. I did not know that you had the HVAC degree, so that's pretty cool. But how many times does that come in handy when you're talking to somebody that's in that field? Now, all of a sudden, when you're able to speak the same language, mm-hmm. they're like, oh, hey, because again, the brain is just looking for similarities. Like, mm-hmm. hey, oh yeah, you've got some knowledge in that? Like, okay. And then all of a sudden you're able to have a side conversation and create a connection.
Yep.
We're connected because we have a little bit of a shared background.
Yeah. Yeah, no, from a rapport building standpoint, which is, I think is what you're getting at, that is astronomical, is if you can generate that rapport within the first 10 to 15 seconds. And you do that by using the language that whoever you're speaking to is accustomed to, right? I'm not going to talk to a tradesman the same way I'm going to talk to a nurse practitioner. They speak two very different languages, even though we all speak English.
Well, and, Mike has heard me talk about this before, and back in my restaurant days, one of the things that I always used to say is being a manager, and I think what you're talking about here, Michael, is I used to say being a manager, you have to be like a chameleon. And a chameleon is really nothing more than a lizard, right? However, it's a very unique lizard in that it can change its colors to match what it's in, right? Its environment. So like you said, when I was in my restaurant days, I could talk to a high school football jock in a certain way, right? And motivate the heck out of them and connect with them. But if I tried to do that same thing with a 17-year-old hostess, boom, blow them out of the water, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that, what you're talking about is, that ability. So how long have you been networking in the field? Because you probably didn't have to do a lot of networking in Red Bull, I would imagine. Probably some, but
it was very different. It was more honed. I would say that I did a lot of networking as a district manager with all the different larger corporations like the Fry's and the Walmart, Circle K, 7-Eleven, getting to know the key players that are high enough up the ladder that when a directive did come down and we did pay for space, that we got that execution done. A lot of that is relationship driven, even though you as an organization are paying someone for something. At the end of the day, they don't have to do it. So if you're nice and if you're kind and respectful and you treat people the way that you want to be treated in that world, like, you will get what you pay for. And at the end, so kind of a pseudo networking, I guess. Maybe not. It wasn't like a full-time thing until I switched over from Merrill to Edward Jones, where then I realized like this is one of my strengths and I need to go play on it.
And so what are some of the things that you've learned about yourself in networking?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I've learned that I get a lot of satisfaction from being a connector. Regardless of what I get out of it, if I have the ability to get two people together or get an idea off the ground for someone, that makes me a lot happier, and then that shows up in my conversations with people. Because I definitely do wear my heart on my sleeve, and when I'm having a bad day, like, people can tell. It's pretty obvious. But when I'm having a great day, people can also tell. It's very obvious. It's very infectious. And I definitely, that came out more, and that allowed me to adjust some of my intentionality that I had in those networking circles. Because I think when I started, it was like, oh, I'm going to come here and we're going to work together, and I'm going to sell you something, you're going to sell me something, and we're going to be happy. But when that didn't happen, right, then all of a sudden things changed. And being able to notice that in who I am as an individual has allowed me to really explode in the last, 18 months or so. And it made definitely a lot of shifts and changes to the different groups I'm a part of and the reasons I'm still there or the reasons I left. And ENO was a big focus on that, because when we were talking, Phil, a year and a couple months ago, and you were talking about this new, mastermind leads group, I think the first thing I said to you was just tell me when it's up and running and send me the invoice. Like I was sold on that 45-second conversation, because I knew that there was definitely something there with that. In the back of my mind, that was who I was, more as an individual and less as a quote unquote, this is what a networker does, right? They do step 1, 2, 3, and they just go down. This is the outline of who it is. And I definitely don't follow traditional outlines for, how you're supposed to act as, a teenager growing up, and then, getting a degree, then going to the military, and then getting out and working my way up from the ground floor and getting another degree, and, then getting a second one towards the end of my tenure there. I definitely don't follow the same, pattern that a lot of my peers did.
Well, and you just said something that I think is really interesting is I think that people try to follow a networking script / agenda. Mm-hmm. And I see what happens is there's no room for flow, right?
Yeah.
So when you're trying to be that, it's just too structured. You can't be you. They can't be them. Mm-hmm. And so there's some basics, right? You have to understand. So I think people either try to follow it so rigidly, or they completely throw it out the window, right?
Yeah.
And then they have nothing. And it sounds to me like what some of the basics are, but then you just play the game, so to speak, right? Just like baseball. If you know how to play baseball, you know how to do what you need to do when you need to do it, right? Yep. But it doesn't always fall together in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of an agenda.
Yeah. Oh, no, I like that baseball analogy, because you got to understand the fundamentals of the sport before you step foot in the batter's box. But once you're in the batter's box, right, you're completely dependent on somebody else throwing a variation of different balls and speeds. That's where that flexibility comes into play huge. And then, depending on how you hit the ball and the humidity in the air, that might affect how far it goes and the spin on it. And then you've got to make an adjustment, halfway down the line to first base. And then you just kind of keep going. But you have to understand the fundamentals first, or else you would run to third base instead of first.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of people do is they come in and they start networking. And, I've watched both of you guys, right? I mean, literally, I've watched both of you guys grow up, so to speak, in networking, right? Because you and I've known each other about 2.5 or 3 years through another networking, and same place, met you there as well, almost 4.5 years ago now, right? And, I see so many times people just, they just run into networking and they're just all over the place, right? And they don't understand the basics. They talk way too much. Both of you guys were great at observing, right? Listening and observing and not talking as much.
Yep.
Right? And that's where you learn a lot. By observing.
Yeah, I mean, that's in any business, the ability to just sit there and look at something long enough, you'll get the answers you need. If you're the loudest person in the room, you probably need to go to another room, right? If you're the smartest person in the room, you should probably go to another room. That same kind of mentality. But if the more that we can open our ears to hear what's going on around us, gives us the ability to, go back to the chameleon example, right? It turns you into a chameleon because it allows you to adapt to the space and where you're at,
Yep.
Absolutely. Excuse me. I would say, really, at the end of the day, it's like you became more effective.
Yeah, I think that's a great word for it. I probably spend more time networking now than I did 2 years ago, but it feels like less time. Because I've gotten more efficient at it. And I'm able to kind of see the results that I held for myself going into those spaces beforehand, was really having a clear intentionality around why I'm here and doing what I'm doing, right? Like earlier this year, I dropped a couple of groups. I kept one that from an ROI standpoint is absolutely atrocious, but I'm able to serve on the Veterans and Business Council, which is like a passion project. So like that made sense to me from like a financial decision. It was like, hey, you like doing this. It brings you a lot of joy. You spend a couple hours on it a month. Like then you go ahead and you keep paying that due because eventually something will come out of it, But in the meantime, like my happiness is worth something as well. And that's an okay cost to bear.
Well, and that's, a lot of times people, like they'll get into like Rotaries and Kiwanis clubs, and as a certified networker, you want to diversify your networking, and that's what you're doing with that veterans group.
Yeah,
it's not about the business that you'll get; it's about filling another need, and eventually there'll probably come one thing out of there that you're like, okay, it's all been worth it.
Yes.
And it's worth it now, or you wouldn't be doing it, right?
Oh, exactly.
You're not doing it for the dollars.
No.
You made a conscious choice of that.
I did, and that was kind of like my, quote unquote New Year's resolution, right? Was really to take a step back and understand what's serving me and how does it affect me, and then and a lot of it, through the personal development courses that Jack has, opened my eyes up quite a bit to understanding that underlying intentionality that we hold either on the subconscious or the conscious level. Because I think there's a lot of things that go on in our minds that we just don't pay attention to because we've never learned the ability to give it the space that it needs to come out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So since you've been a member of ENO, how have you seen the effectiveness, show up in your business and in your life?
I think it definitely made me a more empathetic listener. I've always scored pretty high on like an empathy scale, but I've never really known how to translate that over into almost like a quantitative measure through the business to see like what kind of results that actually does drive. And through the last year or so in the mastermind, because I think I just paid my dues last month. So it's been a year now. But I've been able to understand how that plays out in those conversations, either with current clients or prospects. And I'm able to gauge, not just on a fiscal level of, what I'm doing for myself, because we're all in business to make money. But I'm also able to see that in the relationships through, certain clients that maybe don't have a lot of money, but they're getting a lot of value out of what our conversations look like because of that deeper level of understanding, the empathy.
Awesome. So where do you see it? So going back to the beginning of the conversation, what we were talking about, having that vision and like thinking about like, okay, like what does my last day on this earth look like? How do I want to spend my time doing that? Is there a vision that showed up for you? Like, well, maybe you've never even thought of it before. We started talking about it this morning, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, it's something I've thought about a lot and I've thought about this my entire life. I think the perfect like last day, right, before I slide under the ground, is I'm doing something with a lot of energy, and as I'm doing that, that's kind of my last move. So there was a saying, like I'm going to paraphrase this terribly, but like my goal in life is to slide into the grave, screaming, yeehaw, and just enjoying life to its fullest. So whether that be, going and jumping out of a plane and that being my last activity, like I'd be super content with that. Driving some fast car that ends up getting slammed into a wall because there was a malfunction somewhere, like I would be okay with that. I do not want to die, sitting on a porch, drinking coffee and reading a book. That's not who I am. If I was on a moose hunt in Alaska and I got trampled, like everyone could say he was doing what he loved. Like that would make me happy. It's just going out kind of not necessarily with a bang, but in something that was a passion project.
So let me ask you this, because sometimes we don't control all of that, right?
Exactly.
And, our health has a lot to do with what our last days look like. So I know you pretty well, Michael. Let's say that none of that's even on the table for you.
Yeah.
Because health doesn't allow it. How can you still bring that same kind of passion and energy to whatever that last day might look like?
Yeah. I think then that looks like being able to do that for somebody else, right? Maybe I'm not the one who's going out and doing the 60-mile trek for a moose hunt in Alaska, but I've got the ability to help someone get there, or to be in camp as a guide, or maybe I own the car at the track, and I'm giving someone their dream of being able to race something that costs way more than it ever should. Or I own the plane that someone's jumping out of because I can't physically do it anymore, but one day I will have my pilot's license, and I will own a couple of planes, right? Not just one.
You guys are on the same side of the table, and you're both plane guys.
Yeah, I think I like bigger planes.
Yeah. What, like jets and multi-engine? What do you?
Yeah, my ideal plane, I would definitely have 2 engines at least.
Yeah. Well, redundancy is a good thing.
It is, yeah, and that's actually not the reason. If I'm gonna my thought process behind flying is like I want to be able to, take off from here in Phoenix and get up to like North Dakota on a tank, right, or go up to Maine on a tank. So like my furthest trip might be from like coast to coast, like, San Diego up to Maine. And that's kind of the thought process behind like which plane I pick is the one that'll allow me to do that. Obviously I understand that comes with a huge cost.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you get into those nicer planes and, it's a different price point.
Just a tick higher. Right. But yeah, no, that's, that ability to just go, what, this weekend I'm going to go, duck hunting in Michigan or something, or I'm going up to Nebraska to go hunt, pheasants. Like and not have to like stop in like Colorado and refill, and then, you know, keep going into South Dakota and refill, and then you'll make your last jump over, but just being able to just bounce.
If I remember correctly, you grew up having like what, a Piper Cub?
Yeah. So I grew up I was born and raised in Alaska. My dad's was a bush pilot. He was also a math teacher in the districts. My mom was a special ed teacher in the districts, and we lived up in Nome, which is as far north as you can get, until you basically hit, was it the Arctic Circle, or north of that before you actually hit the Arctic. So my first vehicle ever as a child was a plane. You know, we had a quad, I think, in one of the houses, but that was to get us from the house to the plane. A couple of the houses, the plane, we would just land in the front yard. Because like that was the car, right? Like everyone here in the valley is like, oh yeah, you know, plane's in the hangar, you go to the airport. I'm like, yeah, the plane was out the front door. Like, you know, that's how we get around. And then, you know, somebody had a car that was just at the airfields, and you could just take it when you landed and go to pick up what you needed to, and you came back and you dropped the car off and you get in the plane and you take off. And that was, you know, that was normal. That was to me, that was what existence was until we got to Long Beach. And then took a commercial flight, which was new to me as a kid. I remember sitting in between, you know, two older ladies flying from Anchorage to Seattle, and Seattle down to Long Beach, and just playing my, you know, old school Game Boy, you know, the original gray one. But my parents being like, you know, 8 rows in front of me, and I'm, you know, just super comfortable on a plane, and always have been. There's no fear there.
Awesome. So do you currently have your license pilot certificate or no?
No. It's one of those things like when I go to do it, I'm going to do it and then buy my plane. I can see the value of getting your license now and then renting a plane, but I want to be able to own it and have a place to store it. So like there's a much larger financial entry point for me, because I would like to see it happen in this particular way. Because it doesn't make sense, like where I'm at in life with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old now, to, you know, essentially just be renting a plane, you know, a couple times a year when I'm going to have other expenses that pop up, like sports. That's going to start pretty soon for my son. And then my daughter's going to cost me a small fortune, just because she will. She's my kid. It's not her gender. It's just who she is.
That's awesome. Oh, so you have a vision. Yeah. Right. You see the vision of like, all right, this is what I want. And then, okay. And you accept the realities of what you see for yourself as, okay, here's the game plan. Right. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of power in that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Michael, real quick before we wrap up here in the next little bit, is there a practice that you do on a daily basis to keep that vision in front of you? And there may or may not be, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, saying a mantra in the morning, I've never been like huge on that. I think maybe once a week or something, I'm looking at different planes and just seeing what's out there. I know a lot of people do that with like Zillow and houses, and they look to see what's for sale, and they imagine themselves in a larger house. I don't care if I live in a trailer that's 400 square feet if I can have my plane. And that'll probably be the case because that plane's going to be expensive.
Well, you know, Oprah, I'm pretty sure Oprah Winfrey made this the big thing, like, oh, your vision boards and all this and that. And you know what? It's really a really powerful tool. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you listen to Steve Harvey, you know, he's huge into, you know, the vision. And you don't necessarily have to have a vision board, right? However, whatever tools you do to keep it in front of you, that's where the power is. So like for myself, you know, I own a plane, and, you know, I would always have like on my browser within my cell phone was the open pages for searching for planes and just seeing what was available. Same thing goes for land. I want to buy land up in Montana. I have a couple of websites that I don't ever close that browser out of my, you know, archive, because I just look at it. I just want to look at it. I'm always looking, and that right there, it's essentially the vision board without having a vision board in front of you. It's just you're able to open it up and I can look and I can kind of peruse around and check it out and see like, oh, okay. Oh, hey, look, there's something available. Or what does this look like? Is this possible, right? There's a lot of power in that. How many people are out there that they have this idea, yet they're like, oh, it's silly to make a vision board, or it's silly to... No, it's just a tool. Mm-hmm. It's just a tool to make you more effective. What is it that you want in this life? What do you want to create? What do you want to do? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? What do you like? All of these things. When we start asking these questions, now all of a sudden, like, oh, there's more power in the questions than the answers.
Oh, absolutely. Part of what I do, right, is long-term financial goals. And a lot of people have a hard time like vocalizing what they want to achieve because it's so far out, right? If you're 30 and want to talk about retirement, like you've got another 30 plus years before that happens. Even people who are 10 years away from retirement, like they don't necessarily know what they want that to look like. So those questions are huge. And when people and you see that light bulb moment go off, and I think like part of my, quote unquote vision board is that, when I'm in those conversations with clients or prospects is that I will share my vision of what I want. And I'll break it down into detail. And then that helps a lot of people who are stuck in like the minutia of like, well, I just can't afford to retire. Well, you don't know if you can or can't because you don't know what you want to do,
And when you don't know, of course you can't.
Yeah. And if you don't know, you definitely can't do it. But if you have a clear path on where you want to get to, like there's 1,000,000,001 ways to get there. Like you just got to find what works right for you. But it all starts with understanding the end goal and what that looks like, in my world, right, from a cost standpoint. Don't ever tell me you bought a new car because secretly I'm doing the math in my head and questioning like how you afforded that.
Well, so you mentioned that you had a culinary arts degree.
Yeah.
All right. Now this will tie in. You'll be like, okay, hold on a second. So that toque, that the chef hat, right? It has all those pleats on there, all those creases. What do those creases represent?
Man, that was so long ago.
All right. This is how it ties in. It's all the different ways you can cook an egg. Right? So like you said,
no, you're right.
Just said right now, like there's a whole bunch of different ways to get to that, whatever it is that you vision, wherever you want to go for your financial goals and when you want to retire and what does that look like? Well, there's all these different ways to get there. You just need to know, like, well, do I want scrambled eggs or do I want an omelet or do I want over easy or do I want a quiche? I mean, all of a sudden, like, okay, well, what is it that you want?
Yep.
It's awesome to be able to have somebody like you to say, okay, this is the vision that I have. This is what I want. This is what, let's make it happen.
Yep. Yeah. And, I think a lot of people, when they think about what they want, they think it's too expensive until you start backtracking into it and understanding like, it's a lot cheaper to travel abroad than it is to travel in the United States. A lot of people think it's a lot cheaper to travel here. And I'm like, no, we could do, a 3-week vacation in Ireland for the cost of a weekend at Disneyland. Disneyland, right? That's 6 hours away, not World. Like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, Michael, let's wrap up with this. What's one thing that how do I want to ask this? What's one thing that people don't know about you?
Ooh. All right. I'm trying to there's a lot. Obviously, I've hinted towards, I flew a plane when I was 3, was pulling on the yoke and stuff around a mountain. We almost crashed into it because my dad wasn't paying attention. My mom was freaked out in the back seat. I used to play with meese. So we had a playground in my backyard in one of the houses in Anchorage, and we had a family of moose or meese, whatever the plural is. Numbers are my thing, not words. Please remember that. But I would be within like 2 or 3 feet of like a baby like a calf, most of the year. And that scared the living daylights out of my mom. My dad just sat there laughing like, he's fine. He's, they're not going to step on him. He's okay. And I remember like that vividly was, almost having like a pet moose as a kid.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't hear that too often.
No. I remember one time, hiking in the Tetons and coming up over a ridge, like about the distance of this table across from a full grown moose. And that is scary as you know what. And he chased us right back down the hill.
Oh, I could imagine. So, like, as a teenager, I spent a lot of time in Yellowstone because my dad's family's from Montana, and always coming up to the bison or the moose that were up there, and getting within a few feet of it. And I know that that's a stupid thing to do, but I'm so used to being around it as a kid that sense of calm like sweeps over you, and you're just able to like, be one with your surroundings. It's just phenomenal.
Well, and I think that there's a difference between, what your experience was and who you are and were in those situations than the people we see on TV that do stupid things, right?
Oh, yeah.
The animals actually probably sensed a huge difference between you and the knucklehead.
Oh, yeah. I think, we as humans are very good about picking up fear in those nonverbal cues. Animals are even better at it, right? Like they have to, for a sense of to survive, they've got to be fully aware of their surroundings at any given point in the day. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, cool.
Anything
else you want to ask Micah?
No, I think I'm all good. Great conversation today.
Yeah. So, Michael, tell people your name, your company name, and a phone number, how they can reach you.
Yeah, so Michael Kreitimger. I work under the Edward Jones umbrella, and the best number to reach me at is 480-899-3476. 480-899-3476. And a gal named Heidi will answer the phone.
Awesome. Well, that wraps our podcast for today. This will actually be up live in the next couple of days. You can find it on YouTube. You'll also find it on our Facebook group as well, ENO's Empowerment Networking Organization Facebook group. And with that, Micah, thanks for being here. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was a great conversation.
Fantastic. You guys all have a great day. Peace out.